Hey everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be the Game Week 1 preview. If you've never seen the preview series before, we effectively look at the top 3 to 4 major topics or questions asked by FPL managers for that certain game week, and we try to answer that using a bit of data, a little bit of my own insight, and then also any sort of quotes and topics that we've been able to find on that topic. As far as the series, we'd also like to say it's sponsored by Fantasy Football Hub, so do have a look at the tool, which is incredible for improving your experience as an FPL manager. I myself, getting my top 500 finish, definitely did benefit from using Fantasy Football Hub last season. They actually have an exciting deal, which is 50% off up until the Friday deadline for Game Week 1. So that's 50% off your lifetime membership. If you want to have a look at that, have a look at the link in bio below. Now, starting with the Game Week 1 preview series, the first question is going to be on Dominic Solanke. A lot of people will be asking questions like, does he actually improve this Spurs team? And why I myself, for example, as an FPL manager, have not gone for him in my Game Week 1 drafts? Because what I've noticed is that his percentage ownership has gone up, and a lot of managers have actually included Dominic Solanke on their latest drafts. And so what I'd like to probably look at first is the market projections for the season-long goal tallies for someone like Dominic Solanke. Rob T is an amazing FPL Twitter user. You can find him at RobTFPL. He basically shared a graphic with the goal projections for Dominic Solanke after he was confirmed to have signed Spurs. And so what's interesting is his goal tally has actually dropped. And a lot of people would probably immediately say that's not going to happen, blah, blah, blah. But I think the interesting thing is maybe answering the question of why the markets would predict that to happen. And first of all, I think the answer is going to be penalties. Penalties are currently taken by Son, who's the leader of the team. He's not exactly a prolific penalty taker, right? He's 12 to 5. Solanke is 12 to 2. If I recall, and clearly Solanke is currently the better penalty taker. But I think that Son will likely keep penalties. We've seen that time and time before with certain players, right? Salah was not the best penalty taker, or never has been the best penalty taker at Liverpool, but he's always taken penalties. And so I do think that can somewhat apply to someone like Son, unless he is very, very giving and he gives away the penalties. And that's happened before. In the Korean national team, we saw Hwang Ki-chan take penalties over Son because he was very much wanting to take them, but then Son gave them away. I'm not necessarily sure whether Son will give penalties away, but that would be a huge question mark for Dominic Solanke's amount of goals per season, because I think the biggest thing for Solanke is when you look at Bournemouth, he had 3 penalties to take last season, took 3 rather, scored 2. But the crucial thing is we always knew that he was going to play 90 minutes a game and that he was always going to take a penalty. Now, when you're looking at a team like Spurs, I think that the penalty share definitely is weighted towards Son. I might even say something like 80 to 20. But for the purposes of FPL, you're either going to have to plan for Son being the penalty taker or Solanke being the penalty taker. Now, if you genuinely believe that Solanke will take penalties, I think that his season-long goal tally will skyrocket. And whatever the markets have projected, as we can see or infer from Rob T's graphic, is going to be wrong. On top of that, I think Richarlison has stayed in the team. He's also mentioned a lack of willingness to actually join a Saudi team this summer. So it seems like Richarlison can definitely stay in the team. And we know that they have a bit of depth in that sort of 9 spot, right? We have Kulusevski and we also have Richarlison. And in my opinion, that is going to reduce Dominic Solanke's ability to get the maximum amount of goals that FPL managers want. Because when you look at Solanke last season, he was actually the forward who played the most amount of minutes that season. And this was even over someone like Watkins or any of the other major forwards that we think about as, high minutes forwards. He was playing effectively 90 minutes a game wherever he could, as long as he was on the field. My concern with Solanke is when you look at the opening fixtures, they're actually not that great compared to even, let's say, Bournemouth's opening 3 fixtures. So I think that's another element that some managers might have missed out on. Some of the fixtures like Everton might be a little bit more defense tilted than attack tilted, right? We know Everton is classically a little bit of a stronger defense, at least under Dyke, and a little bit worse of an offense, although they are very good set piece offense themselves. So that's one of the key points that I'd like to strike at. I think Dominic Solanke was always a good pick, especially even as a Bournemouth player, and the price rise was warranted, which is why FPL had sort of given him the price rise despite any sort of transfer speculation being in place when they released the prices. So it's very clear that they did correctly think that Solanke at Bournemouth would be well priced at 7.5. I think that the reality is he might have huge cons and huge pros, right? Joining Spurs. And we can see that because our expectation for anyone joining Spurs is that he's going to be a lot more prolific in terms of getting chances at goal, taking more shots per game. And what does that lead to? That only leads to not only does that lead to more goals or maybe even more NPXG, because it just means that he's going to be in more positions to get shots. But it also means that he can get things like rebound assists in FPL, which we might not be able to capture perfectly. right? So if you become a little bit more of an open play threat, generally speaking, you can get more FPL assists. And Watkins is a great example of that, but he still was a big aberration last season. So I think that really the balance in Solanke is going to be quite fine, and he's not immediately a better asset, in my opinion, for having joined Spurs. The second question is going to be on Christopher Nkunku, or even the topic. A lot of people seem to be questioning, okay, Chelsea are literally looking to buy every attacker in the under the sun, and they've already signed Pedro Neto. They're about to sign potentially someone like Osimhen or maybe even João Felix as part of that Conor Gallagher deal. What is interesting about this is that we have seen in the preseason that Nkunku clearly is occupying that 10 spot, and he can play a flexible amount of roles, right? He can play left wing, he can play striker. Enzo Maresca has already confirmed this, but it's very clear that Chelsea are also going for another forward in this window, and so his minutes can definitely be limited. We also know that Dewsbury Hall, a favorite of Enzo Maresca's, can play in the 10 spot, and clearly Palmer can play in the 10 spot, but seems like he's going to be playing right wing for the start of the season, right? Because Madueke has been rumored to also potentially be one of the outgoing players for the season, and so is Sterling. So we know that some of the depth might actually leave, but it's a major concern. What I would say about Nkunku is that I think he's very much in that sort of Palmer spot in the team where he is so high priority. I can't see him really sitting on the bench for any key fixture, at least up until the European games. On top of that, once the European games actually happen, those are European Conference League games. So it's more than likely we'll see a little bit more rotation from a team like Chelsea that can actually afford to fully rotate than, let's say, a team would play within the Champions League, and they would play their close to full strength side, even in the Champions League group stage matches, unless, they've already guaranteed a great result within the groups. So that's sort of my thoughts on Nkunku. I don't see him really going onto the bench. And so I also don't see him necessarily being an extremely early sub. And what do I classify as an extremely early sub? 60 to 65 minutes. When we go back to Rob T's graphic for the season-long goal tallies, I have to point out that you will not find another 6.5 midfielder anywhere close to Nkunku on this graphic. The reality is that the markets project him to be a game breaker, and so it's up to you as an FPL manager to sort of decide whether you want to swerve Nkunku or not. Because I think that there's a lot of logic in simply just going for Nkunku. Why? Because we think that the upside is there. As long as you think the minutes are reasonably good and that he's going to start every single game, I just can't see why Nkunku would be a pick that you'd want to swerve. Now, as I said, with a 9 coming in, that could reduce his goal tally. So what I would be interested in looking at is if they sign Osimhen, or if the transfer rumors are coming closer, do we see these market projections actually dropping a little bit? And that gives us a little bit of an indication as well as to how, let's say, an objective third party like the markets would perceive Nkunku. But for now, even with a 9 coming in as predicted, I still think that Nkunku is an amazing pick because we do know that he can play multiple positions. The minutes can be filled. I still think he starts most games of football for Chelsea. And I'm just going to take that as the perspective for Nkunku right now. I think he's just an amazing pick. Yes, of course, the Premier League history is limited, but some of those Bundesliga numbers are just absolutely ridiculous. And on top of that, I think even within his limited stints within the Premier League, we've seen a lot to like, particularly from the underlying stats. And if there's one point of concern that I have for Chelsea this season, it might really be defense as opposed to offense. Some people might have bigger questions about Enzo Maresca, and I think that's totally fine. If you have major reservations about him as a manager, and you think that, let's say, this Chelsea team has overall taken a huge downgrade from going off Poch, who was playing some great football at the end of last season with Chelsea, to now Enzo, who has struggled in the preseason, but for the most part, I think, everything is, the jury is still out, right? The season hasn't started. And so I think it's up to you to decide whether you want to go Nkunku. Another transfer path that I've seen managers go for is to start with a different 6.5 and then to leave a transfer in behind for Nkunku in Game Week 2. I still don't really love that because yes, we have 5 free transfers this season, but the whole point is that if you really want to be rolling or saving free transfers, you have to make sure your team is a little bit impenetrable from needing free transfers. And so if you're booking a free transfer in Game Week 2 for Nkunku, I do think that you're sort of shooting yourself a little bit in the feet because that leaves you in a little bit of a worse position to maneuver if, let's say, a shock injury comes about to your team and so on and so forth, whilst Nkunku continues to tick along for most managers despite having a slightly poor Game Week 1 fixture. Now, question number 3 is going to be about just generally structure-wise what I'm seeing from Salah, Haaland, and Salah only, and Salah plus Haaland drafts. What I can say from looking at some of the sort of models that we have, which includes Fantasy Football Hub's model as well, is that generally speaking, you're able to create teams that are very strong with all types of structures. But I still think that the Salah Haaland structure is a little bit hamstrung by the fact that we all want to have at least some of the premium defenders, maybe Trent, someone who's a little bit more expensive, the midfield position. So I'm talking about players like Bruno, Jota, and Gordon. And then also Isak, crucially speaking, in the forward position. What I don't like about that is that by having to get all of these players on the pitch, you probably have to go for a lot of the 5.0s and 5.5 picks, or you're going to lose out in one of the positions that I mentioned. And if to be honest, you are willing to sacrifice on, let's say, going no Isak for game week 1, no Bruno on game week 1, no Trent on game week 1, I can understand a Salah and Haaland draft being viable, but you also have to realize that it is probably going to be quite inflexible. However, we do have really good 5.5 forwards in the game. So if you're willing to, let's say, play players like Armstrong and João Pedro every week, I think it can actually work out really well. Or if you're allowed to, or if you allowed yourself a little bit of rotation with players like Morgan Rogers. So that's my thought on Salah Haaland. I still think that it's the more inflexible draft structure, but that's because I'm someone who really wants to have Isak in game week 1. And those are my thoughts, really. I prefer Salah only drafts or Haaland only drafts. And what are the benefits of Salah only drafts? Clearly, it's the idea that you don't actually need to book transfers in advance. You have definitely missed a game week 2 captaincy, which is crucial for Haaland, right? That's where Haaland is by far clear as a captaincy choice. What I can say about game weeks 1 to 6 is that the only week where Salah is very, very clearly the best captaincy option at the start of the season, just based on what we know right now. Who knows? He might suddenly have reduced minutes under slot and we can see earlier substitutions, but I think that's unlikely to happen. The reality is Salah right now looks like the best option for game week 5, and Haaland looks like the best option for game week 2. So the way I see it, if you're starting with Salah only, you're not booking any transfers, right? You're trying to actually achieve the impossible, which is try to get the 4 to 5 free transfers, at least the 3 to 4 territory, which is very strong for an FPL manager, I think, because that is a very, very good insurance clause. On top of that, you miss out on the Haaland captaincy, but then I think your structure becomes the structure that everyone wants to have on a Salah only draft after game week 2. Once again, it really comes down to your own personal preference and whether you really are willing to sacrifice that Haaland only captaincy. Because I think that the gulf between the Haaland only captaincy in game week 2 is much larger than the gulf between a Salah only captaincy in game week 5 versus any other possible captain option. So that's my thoughts. With the Haaland captaincy or Haaland only drafts, switching gears to that, you do absolutely capture the correct captain in game week 2, or the optimal captain, as people want to say. And as I said, I think it's a much bigger gulf than it would be in game week 5. So by going for Haaland, if you start with someone like Saka alongside Haaland, you probably are booking a transfer in game week 4 or game week 5. The reason why I say this is because it's convenient to go into Mo Salah back in game week 4 if you're willing to drop someone like Isak, right? What's crucial about Isak is we want to capture Isak for game week 1. But I can see myself as an FPL manager definitely going for someone like Muniz or Armstrong, even on game week 4, since I'm also planning for a wildcard 6. But even if I wasn't, I don't really mind the idea of actually going to a Salah and Haaland draft on game week 4, because I wouldn't really want to have Isak in my team necessarily. I would be happy with sort of conceding Saka in my team because Saka doesn't have great fixtures on, let's say, game week 4 or 5. And it's a good opportunity to switch gears into that sort of inflexible draft structure before I wildcard. At the same time, I think you can also allow yourself another option, which is going to be something like Saka to Son instead. And that would be Saka to Son potentially on game week 5. Because I would argue that for the Liverpool, or rather for the Arsenal versus Tottenham fixture, you probably still want to have Saka over Son in that fixture. Because I think we do think Arsenal are the stronger team, are the stronger offense anyways, and you'd probably back Saka then. But then you can conveniently switch to someone like Son for game week 5 and live with that for just 1 week. So I think there are two options, right? You're booking some transfers in advance, definitely as a Haaland-only manager. You're not really booking transfers for the Salah-only manager, but you also have to concede that game week 2 is going to be a bad week for you, most likely, right? Who knows? Haaland could definitely disappoint versus Ipswich. I wouldn't be shocked. We've seen that before in football many, many times before. But it's just about planning ahead and sort of trying to sort of rationalize the outcomes as a certain manager. And that's pretty much my thoughts on Salah and Haaland. The last topic is going to be on Diogo Jota as well, because I find that it's quite interesting. A lot of people want to go for Jota. And to be fair, it makes a lot of sense. Jota right now is clearly the number 1 center forward within the team. Darwin is definitely a little bit less match fit. He's only played 60 minutes in the preseason for Liverpool. I think it's very clear that someone like Jota can start most of the games from game week 1 onwards. But the question, I suppose, is always going to be, is Darwin really so bad that he's not going to take minutes off the bench from someone like Diogo Jota? And whilst a lot of people are seeing that Slot has had a great preseason, the offense looks absolutely ticking. But the question I'd probably ask most managers is, are Liverpool that much better than they would be under someone like Jurgen Klopp? I think that's a big shout to say that Liverpool could really be that much better as an offense under slot. And maybe it can happen, but the issue as well is that if Jota rotates quite a fair bit, which actually happens, right? If you look at slot and any of the Feyenoord players who were attackers last season, a lot of players, even the leading players in the team like Minte, did not play more than, let's say, 2,600, 2,700 minutes in the season. So it clearly shows that rotation's already in place, even for a key player. I would say that a key player right now is Salah, right? Even irrespective of the fact that Salah hasn't been that interesting in the preseason, and Jota has been looking great. Luis Diaz has had a great cameo basically for 60 minutes. I would still say that Jota's minutes are going to be on the lower side compared to some of those sort of 90-minute players like Bruno Fernandes in the 8.5 position, or even someone like Anthony Gordon in the same price point as him, who has a great game in Game Week 1 himself, despite maybe, let's say, reduced minutes possible due to the lack of preseason for Anthony Gordon himself. So that's sort of the dilemma that I think a lot of managers are dealing with. From a Game Week 1 to 4 perspective, if you, let's say, we're just wildcarding Game Week 4 and you were just doing 1 to 3, I would probably just go for Gordon. If I was looking at Jota, I'd probably be looking at that wildcard 6 angle, because ultimately Liverpool have a great run of games. The only somewhat tough game is that Man United game, but you also have to take a little bit of a leap of faith here by going for someone like Jota in thinking that, let's say, Darwin is not going to start over him at any point during this sort of tenure, or generally speaking, that you're open to that Jota position being changed to another player, let's say, if you really want to, I suppose, potentially someone like Nkunku or anyone around that sort of price point. Now, what I don't like about Jota so much is that if you can go for options like Bruno, if you can go for options like Gordon prospectively, you're probably not going to have to book that transfer, and you can then spend your transfers on some of the premium options, right? What I talked about previously with the Haaland only draft is that it's more than likely you want to be moving around with the premiums. Maybe in Game Week 4 or 5, you're moving to players like Salah and Son. So if you're booking a transfer as well, potentially for Jota, that gives you a few more problems to deal with in the future. And I'm not sure if that's something that I would do as a manager, but I can certainly see the upside of going for someone like Jota, right? If you know a center forward for Liverpool is playing out of position in the midfield spot in FPL, that's a lot of upside, and it's hard to ignore that upside. So those are my thoughts in terms of the Game Week 1 preview. I really hope you guys enjoyed the video. I've got a couple more video series coming up before the end of the sort of preseason, and we'll look at a Game Week 1 live stream as well. So do stay tuned for that, where I'll definitely be live streaming. I've already done the cheat sheet series, so you can have a look at the final cheat sheet as well. I plan to also rewrite my thoughts on Twitter for anyone who wants to read that sort of thread, but also my impromptu, I would say, team selection is up. My updated draft is up, but I will finalize with the team selection later this week. Thank you guys so much for watching. Take care and goodbye.